Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Leslie Schoveer. She is the author of Fission, we'll say, atomic romance is a good way to describe it. It's a book that takes place during the development of the atomic bomb and the Manhattan Project in the 1940s. And I was looking over and reading a couple chapters last night, and it's quite exciting. I definitely have a bit of a fascination with that period. I think in my middle age, I'm starting to become World War II guy, which is frightening. Um, but it's very fascinating, and it takes place in the darkness of the desert in New Mexico, which is a lot of fun, and various other locations as well. And we're going to find out all about the book, the career, how this came about. There's going to be a fascinating story here. So welcome, Leslie, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, excuse me. I just had a drink before. My sinuses are draining today, and I had a drink right before this. And anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show. Why don't we start from the very beginning? Tell us about yourself and your book, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, I had a long career as a clinical psychologist,
Hmm.
and I spent a lot of it at the Cancer Center here in Houston, MD Anderson on the faculty. And I also published 4 nonfiction books in my specialty, which was kind of what happens to people's sex lives and fertility when they go through cancer treatment. And after I retired from my academic career, I had a startup for about 5 years to try to educate patients and health professionals in that specialty area. And that kind of died during the pandemic. And I went back to my early love of writing fiction. I had taken a lot of creative writing college courses, but I had never really tried to write a novel. And I was inspired by my parents' stories because they were actually in Oak Ridge, Tennessee during the Manhattan Project. And
Hmm.
so a lot of the stories in Fission come directly from the stories they told over and over during my childhood.
Oh, okay. Well, that answers my next question. Is I was going to ask you what inspired you to write about this, because there's not, weirdly enough, there's not kind of this huge body of fiction work about this unique period of history, sort of thing. So I was going to ask what inspired you, and now we know your parents were at Oak Ridge in Tennessee. So,
Well, that was part of the story. The other part of the story was that my father was the last of the two to pass on, and he died in 27 or
hmm.
2007. And after that, starting in about 2019, it started coming out in the New York Times and other news sources in a book that there had been 2 Soviet spies operating at Oak Ridge trying to steal atomic secrets for the Soviets, who obviously also wanted them during that time.
Hmm.
And they were undiscovered until many years later. In fact, one of them got a posthumous medal from Putin for the secrets he gave to the Russians. But what was interesting to me was that my dad was actually an electronics engineer, and so were both of these men. They also both worked in the same building as he did in Oak Ridge.
Oh my.
And they came from similar families, kind of first generation Jewish Eastern European immigrant families. And one of them was a radiation safety officer. And my dad actually had an accidental overdose of radiation during his time in Oak Ridge. So I really wondered if their paths had crossed. But of course, I have no way of ever finding that out. And I'm sure my dad would have been totally indignant if he did know them to find out they had been spies because they were communists and my dad and mom were your garden variety liberal Democrats. So,
Right. Yeah. No, I mean that is quite freaky to think that, that, well, especially for him to have, working right next to someone for all of those years and not understanding they were working for the other side, as it were. So that's that's quite frightening and but very interesting. But And here's the best part for us, the listener and the reader, it makes for fantastic fiction. So that's, and you've delivered the goods on this one. So that's an excellent sort of thing. So why don't we kind of give us a little bit of outline of what is Fission about? Will give us a general outline of the plot and what journey people can be ready to go on when they buy the book.
Well, Fission is kind of a coming of age story. When my parents married, they were very young. My mother was 19 and my dad was 22. And my mother was told by a quack gynecologist that she was infertile, so they didn't use birth control, and she immediately got pregnant and had to drop out of college. And then the war started or had already started at that point, and she followed my father to Oak Ridge. So Fission is kind of her coming of age story as I tried to imagine from my privileged position of having been born in 1952 and gone through school in the age of women's liberation and feeling like I could do whatever I wanted to do, regardless of my gender, to try to go back to that time of my mother who had to give up her dreams of being a concert pianist or a lawyer and work to be anything but a housewife in that era. And,
Yeah.
it's not a memoir, it's a novel, and a novel needs drama. So there are a couple of aspects of the plot that are totally fictional. One is the friendship story between the wife and the young couple, Doris, and Betty, who is a debutante from Richmond, Virginia, who, when she meets Doris, is wondering how Doris could be Jewish and be blonde and also not have horns, because Betty has been taught in Sunday school that Jews had horns. And despite that bad beginning, they become friends and support each other through a lot of stress in living through that period. The other part of the plot that's fictional is a love triangle between Doris and the spy. And so Doris kind of she's giving piano lessons in Oak Ridge, and one of her students is this army engineer and who's very flirtatious, and she's attracted to him despite feeling very guilty about it, and gradually realizes that maybe he's not everything that he is supposed to be, and then has to make a decision: should she turn him in and risk her husband finding out that she was involved with him, or should she let it go and risk, some crisis involving the atomic bomb and information getting to the Soviets?
No, I was noticing that yes, that's I mean you're absolutely right. You definitely bring the drama and bring the people in the book right to the drama, which is quite exciting. And like I said, I always enjoy um stuff in this subject because one, I find it intensely interesting, and two, I feel like there's not enough fiction about this period in time, and you're so close to it. You're like the perfect person to have written this. So that's really quite good. I want to get into process for a moment. I always ask people kind of the same question. Do you outline extensively before you write, or do you just write it as it comes?
I'm somewhere in between the pantsers and the plotters. Uh,
Yeah.
I like to have a general sense of the plot, how things are going to end, what some of the different beats or incidents are going to be in the book, but I don't have a real tight outline. And maybe because I'm a psychologist, when I feel like I'm in a writing well, I let my characters talk to me and kind of tell me what's happening. And I like to feel like I'm listening to them, just like I might have listened to patients talking and tried to figure out what they were feeling inside from, the context and what they were saying.
Yes. No, that I definitely I feel like that'd be a little bit easier for someone like you who's met so many people and kind of knows the code behind human brains, I end up having to go to a book on the Enneagram or some personality thing if I need to write something that's really outside of myself to try to get into the mind of someone else. So that's quite helpful. I will say you are definitely in the minority with me. I'm a pretty hardcore outline person. My autistic brain needs a plan before any words come out. I need to have a plan. I need to know where we're going. We have to get it all figured out. Most of the people who come on the show are really much more the pantsing variety. So I always enjoy someone who uses a soft outline because there are so few of us of that have been interviewed on this show. So I definitely appreciate that as a process.
Well, sometimes the parts of the outline only become clear to me also as I'm going along, and I think, oh yeah, this thing and this other thing should happen before the end of the book, and that would really fit in well. But
Yes.
so as I said, it's kind of semi-pantsing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely tell people, and I definitely myself, I always say an outline is a great plan, but don't be slavishly tied to it. Because other thing will come up, opportunities will present themselves. Characters will sometimes go off plan, off script, off the whole damn reservation. So it's really cool when you can kind of have a plan, but keep it loose, enough to innovate as necessary, sort of thing. That's quite exciting.
I know for another novel I've worked on, it's more of a psychological thriller. I went and got, Save the Cat writes a novel and tried to write out the whole thing with the beats and how far along you are in the novel and everything. And I did do it, and I'm sure it helped some, but in the end, I don't think I stuck to it really rigorously.
Yeah, no, that's definitely no, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, there's a couple systems out there. There's one I'm thinking of that's like a year-long process and was very expensive, and my friend took it years and years ago. And by years ago, I mean literally 20 years ago. At this point. And there's a lot of them out there. And I've always found like, and I teach outlining in my writing courses and all this sort of thing, but I'm kind of like, yes, have an outline. Yes, have a plan. It's very easy to write yourself into corners and, not necessarily know what the next thing is and lose momentum and all this sort of thing. But don't be too slavishly tied to it. Do allow for some modicum of spontaneity.
And one thing I've found really helpful with my writing is I started out when I started writing fiction again,
Mm.
doing some workshops. And I met some fellow writers, and there are two women and I who have been meeting together at least twice a month for, I guess it's probably a couple of years now. And we help each other with our writing. And I recently joined the Women Fiction Writers of America, no, the WFWA, Women's Fiction Writers Association. And they also offer to put together critique groups. So I'm also in a second critique group, and sometimes it gets a little scary being in two different ones at once.
Yes. Yeah, I always kind of dreaded. I did my MFA kind of through the pandemic 21 through 23, and critique groups were definitely hard. For me, both ways. One, people have sometimes not great reactions to my work. My stuff is not for everyone, so that's always nerve-wracking. And two, I end up reading stuff that I probably would have never read otherwise, sort of thing, but I also want to contribute really great feedback. So it's definitely a good way to stretch yourself in multiple ways and directions, which also can improve your work in very subtle ways that you don't always understand. So, yeah, absolutely. So I want to also kind of dig into some of the publishing and promotion stuff because we don't sometimes talk about that stuff enough. How did you bring Fission into the world?
Well, I started out, you know, knowing a little bit about the world of traditional publishing from publishing four nonfiction books, and those were easy peasy to sell. And the only thing I did with my agent was have him negotiate the contracts. But
Right.
that was also many years ago. And not only has life changed for all publishing, but from nonfiction to fiction publishing is definitely a different world. So I probably started out a little arrogant and needing to be knocked down. And as I started finding out about how you query and querying agents and getting total no's from everybody, I started thinking, well, what other alternatives do I have? Especially because as an older woman, it's not as easy. Honestly, I do think agents are somewhat ageist, and there are a few exceptions like Bonnie Garmus, who wrote Lessons in Chemistry. But
Mm.
honestly, I think agents want young, hot writers with lots of social media followers who are going to do book after book. And I don't blame them. It's hard for agents to make a living with the percentages they get and the advances that people get these days in their book contracts. So I thought that the decks were probably stacked against me, even if my writing was decent. So I started learning about hybrid publishing, and kind of on a lark, I submitted my manuscript to She Writes Press, which is one of the oldest and more selective hybrid presses that publishes only women writers. And when they accepted it, I went back to my writing mentors that I'd taken a course with and discovered that the publisher, Brooke Warner, who owns She Writes Press, was an old friend of theirs, which I hadn't even realized. And they said, well, look, if you can afford to do it, it's a great way to publish your book. Go ahead. So I
Yeah.
decided to do that and skip the agent merry-go-round.
Yes, no, that well, I was yeah, this was kind of a opportunity for you to plug them because they are very important. I love what they've been doing for a very long time. I saw their publishing mark in your book, so that's kind of why I wanted to bring that up. And yes, as someone who has is started and is currently running a hybrid program, it's a really great option for people. It is not cheap. I tell everyone all the time, it's not cheap. The guy who went through our first hybrid program in total after marketing costs and everything spent about $11,000. So it's not cheap. But I also tell people who want to do the self-publishing thing, and I have self-published 3 books. That's also not cheap. And I would have spent more if I hadn't done so much myself. Fortunately, I did my own covers, I did my own layout, so that kind of cut half the cost. When it came to marketing, all this type of thing, I still definitely spent quite a bit of money. Even just basic production, barring everything else, and I do a lot myself, I still end up spending 400 or 500 bucks. So yeah, if you don't have any talents in that direction, don't want to learn all that stuff, which is very long and time consuming, all this sort of thing, then yeah, hybrid's a great option, but it is definitely spendy. But I also figure you're going to spend something close to that anyway, so you might as well get wonderful support from a wonderful press who can really boost you, put you out there, and help you discover that audience.
Well, the place that I've found myself being really ambivalent is the added costs of having a publicist on top of a hybrid publisher. And
Mm,
She Writes really wants all their authors to hire a publicist, and the ones they recommend generally start at $10,000 to $13,000 and go up from there. And
yes.
knowing that most indie books are going to sell, if you're lucky, more than 200 books and a lot less than 1,000, you're
Yeah.
never going to get any of that money back. And I didn't feel like I could afford to do that. So I took I'll put in a little plug for Lainey Cameron, a really great book marketing course called 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of the marketing and publicity myself. And so far, I've had some nice hits because August was the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Mhm.
So I reached out and I published a personal essay on the website of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, the Doomsday Clock people. And I
Mhm.
also got interviewed on our local NPR radio station for the anniversary. So, if you can write a decent press release and you're willing to put in the time, I felt like I'm retired and I have lots of time and not that much money. So I'd rather invest myself in, doing things like this and trying to learn all about the best ways to market my book and doing some strategic ads here and there.
No, no, one of the things I love I mean, this is so good because um one of the things I always found frustrating, especially as a young writer, was listening to all these chats, especially once we had podcasts and all that sort of thing. And everyone's talking about, the work and what inspires them. And we'll get to that in a minute. But um, they never talk about the nuts and bolts of, well, how did you actually get this stuff done? So I had to figure it out all the hard way. I remember the very first time I walked in to pitch an agent, I was 26, maybe. Yeah, I think I was about 26 years old. And I'm figuring out, pitching for the first time. I've read all the books. I have written, rewritten, torn career letters apart, all this type of thing. And I was still wholly unprepared for that process. I did that I seriously queried probably for 3 or 4 years before I finally, had two agencies at once ask for a full manuscript sort of thing. And it was a lot of trauma along the way. And people don't talk about what does that look like? So that's why I always ask that question, because it helps give other people an idea of, here's how this actually came to be. So thank you. I appreciate that. But I do want to talk to you as a writer and as someone who's working on this and working on other things. What does inspire you? What gets the creative words on the page?
Well, I think the thought that somebody will read it and it will mean something to them. And I think I've just always loved telling stories. Even in my nonfiction books, I had a lot of composite case examples and things that I wrote that, of course, I would never use a real patient, but I used my experience to try to, you know, put scenarios in my writing that would help other people to understand, what other people's experiences were like.
Yeah.
And I think everybody loves having an audience. That's just, we're human beings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's like I said, this is such an amazing and fascinating story. Local woman falls in love with Russian spy. Film at 11. Um, and but it's also, but I mean, also it's the backdrop and the setting. The other thing I love, and I don't know who did your cover, but the period appropriate font in Fission. As someone who worships at the altar of Art Deco, the minute I saw that, I was kind of like, and they picked a period appropriate font. That makes me, as a designer and creative, that makes me so happy. Like, it was like, the book looks like it was printed in the 1940s. Yes. Like, I
I
absolutely
love
love that.
the cover. And I will say that's one thing about She Writes. They do gorgeous covers. They gave me
Yes.
9 options, and I had a hard time choosing. And a lot of the others were like a couple, but that baby carriage that's on the cover is
Yes.
is actually modeled after a real baby carriage that my mother's rich uncle had given them, a English baby carriage. And I had given a photo of it with my older sister as a baby in the carriage to the cover designer. And the way that they have the woman looking back at Oak Ridge and looking very isolated and lonely with that baby carriage really spoke to me. I loved it.
No, you chose incredibly well. Let me just say that. It was very, very good, excellent cover, very evocative. Just so good. So very good. What well, we're gonna stop here in a moment, mostly because I have a live show at 4 o'clock and I need to break away. Um, but I wanted to ask you before we go and find out where we can buy the book and everything. Um, what is one of your favorite parts of the story?
One of my favorite parts is one that's really modeled after real life. My parents told me that when they wanted to recruit my dad for the Manhattan Project in Chicago, they were invited to the house of his eventual group leader for dinner. And somehow during the course of the evening, he told both my parents, these young, not very fully educated kids, about the atomic bomb, and that he was going to have the mission of creating the first gram of plutonium. And, except for the more senior scientists, most people who worked on the Manhattan Project had no idea what they were working on, and especially the wives were not in the know. And why he told them, I will never fully figure out, although I put together a whole scene to try to explain it in the book. So that was something that was very meaningful to me, because it really shaped their whole experience of Oak Ridge, knowing everything at the start.
No, absolutely. No, that's perfect. I always that's another one of my favorite questions to ask, because we all have that one scene. I don't care who you are, if you've written a book, we all have that one scene that just kind of sticks with us, sort of thing. Um, and I always like to find out which that it was. And surreptitiously, I like that also because that's the scene I read last night to prepare for this interview. So I'm like, this is a good. I'm like, I know exactly what she's talking about, because I'd read it last night as I was quickly getting familiar. So no, wonderful. So this is the part of the show where we do plugs. So let us know where we can keep up with you and where to buy the book.
Well, the book is still in pre-order status, and you
Wonderful.
can pre-order it. Most places you can order a book, because She Writes Press distributes through Simon and Schuster, so it's going to be available as a paperback or an ebook, and it will be available in bookstores and, of course, on Amazon and through bookshop.org and in hopefully some indie bookstores. I'm already trying to work on that a little. I
Yeah.
haven't yet decided whether to do an audiobook. I would like to, but it's another big expense that I don't think I'll earn back. So I may wait and see how it does initially before I decide to add that format. But I know a lot of people love audiobooks.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, as someone who also runs a book publishing program, the ROI on audiobooks is actually quite good. In terms of we've had a couple do outsell their paper or ebook based counterpart, sort of thing. Um, there are some services you can hire that are relatively inexpensive. I paid an actor friend of mine during the pandemic to do my novel and my short story collection. I need to finish editing them. It's only been 5 years. I'll get to it. I'll get there. In between when those recordings were done and today, I did an entire other graduate degree and started working at a publishing company and published another book. So it's just, we're getting to everything, sort of. I'm only 37 years old. We'll get there. But there are some services, but I mean, the ROI for audiobooks is there. There is an audience that does not read a paper book, but will listen to your book. So if you're hesitant, I would look at several services, find one you like. I think the ROI could be there for you, especially in something like this, because it's a whole different audience that you wouldn't ordinarily never get in front of. But I love that it's in pre-order at all the usual places. Excellent, wonderful news. You've been absolutely wonderful and delightful. It's been a true pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you, vice versa. And it will be out on January the 27th.
January the 27th. So, all right. So everyone make sure to note that date. She's in pre-order right now. Thank you so much, Leslie, for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.